The Vatican, 1509. A young artist stood before a wall of smooth, wet plaster inside the stanza della Segnatura, brush trembling in his hand. His name was Raphael Sanzio, only 26, yet already chosen by Pope Julius II to paint what would become one of the most revered masterpieces of the Renaissance, the School of Athens. But what if I told you this painting, the crowning jewel of Renaissance humanism, hides a secret? That it was not merely a celebration of wisdom, but a silent act of rebellion, one that defied both the church and history itself. From a distance, the School of Athens seems to show harmony. Philosophers of every age gathered beneath a vast Roman arch, sunlight pouring over marble steps, geometry and grace intertwined. At its center, two figures stand in perfect balance: Plato, pointing toward the heavens, and Aristotle, gesturing toward the earth. Above them, the sky opens like the dome of a temple. Below, the greatest minds of antiquity, Pythagoras, Euclid, Socrates, Heraclitus, debate and dream. But behind their calm expressions lies something else. Someone is missing. Historians call it a symbolic omission. Others call it deliberate erasure. Because Raphael's fresco, despite its celebration of ancient philosophy, omits one man whose ideas shaped them all and terrified the church the most. A man so dangerous that even centuries after his death, his name was whispered like a curse: Epicurus, the philosopher who denied divine judgment and declared that the gods do not rule the world. And yet, in the fresco, there is no Epicurus. Why? To understand, we must go back to the time when faith and reason were at war, and Raphael stood between them, his brush the only weapon he dared to wield. When Raphael first entered the Vatican halls, Michelangelo was painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel above him, a furious storm of prophets and angels. But Raphael's task was different. His commission was to fill 4 great chambers with images representing theology, poetry, justice, and philosophy. Of these, philosophy would become the School of Athens. And it would not simply depict knowledge. It would question who had the right to define it. In that age, the rediscovery of Greek philosophy was stirring the minds of Europe. The works of Aristotle and Plato, long hidden in Arabic translations, had returned to the universities. But one name, one philosophy, was still forbidden to speak aloud: Epicureanism, the belief that the universe ran on atoms and chance, not gods and destiny. To the church, this was heresy. Epicurus had denied the afterlife, denied divine punishment, denied miracles. He claimed that fear of the gods was the root of human suffering. In short, he had dared to say that man could live without fear of heaven. So when Raphael began to paint his grand portrait of wisdom, he was faced with an impossible question. Could he show the full story of human reason and leave out the man who freed it from fear? Some say he didn't. Some say Raphael hid him. If you look closely at the fresco, in the lower left corner, you will see a man with a wreath of grape leaves around his head, writing in a small book while surrounded by pupils. Art historians identify him as Epicurus. But something is wrong. His features are round, smiling, yet strangely youthful, almost idealized. He wears a crown of ivy, a symbol not of philosophy, but of Bacchus, the god of wine and pleasure. A mockery. To show him as a philosopher would have been forbidden, so Raphael disguised him as a drunken poet, a man of pleasure, not reason. He had painted Epicurus in plain sight, yet concealed him in laughter. And yet, there are deeper layers to this deception. Behind the philosophers, hidden in the geometry of the architecture, lies a pattern, a code. Raphael, obsessed with the harmony of proportion, based the entire structure on the golden ratio, the same mathematical principle the church had long associated with divine perfection. But if you trace the invisible lines of that ratio, they do not converge on Plato or Aristotle. They converge on a single shadowed figure, a man standing alone in the back, head bowed, lost in thought. That man, some scholars believe, was not one of the ancients at all. It was Raphael's secret portrait of himself, watching the philosophers as if separated from them by time and faith, unable to belong to either side. a hidden confession painted in stone. But the real mystery is not Raphael's self-portrait, nor the coded geometry. It's what came next, the disappearance of something even more daring. Because early sketches of the School of Athens, preserved in archives at Venice, show a 13th figure near the center who does not appear in the final fresco. A figure holding an open scroll marked with strange symbols, half mathematical, half mystical. That figure was removed, erased before the painting was completed. The question is, why? And who was he? In the centuries since, theories have multiplied. Some say it was Hypatia, the woman philosopher of Alexandria, erased for being a pagan. Others claim it was a symbolic image of Pythagoras' golden disciple, a student who discovered forbidden truths of number. But a few, whispering in the corridors of the Vatican, tell a different story, that the missing figure was none other than the embodiment of forbidden knowledge itself, drawn from the Hermetic texts that circulated secretly among Renaissance scholars. The Church could not allow such a figure to stand among the saints of reason, so they painted him out. And Raphael, silent, obedient, brilliant, let them. But not before leaving one last clue. A subtle gesture. A missing shadow. A mark that would puzzle historians for centuries. And that clue lies not in the philosophers, nor in the architecture, but in the eyes of a single man sitting at the very front, staring directly at us. The one figure who breaks the fourth wall of the fresco. The only one looking at you. Who was he? And why did Raphael make him our witness to a secret erased by the Vatican itself? There is something unsettling about him. That lone figure at the front of the School of Athens who looks straight out of the painting and into us. He sits apart from the crowd, resting his head on one hand, his eyes dark with melancholy. His name, according to most art historians, is Heraclitus, the philosopher of change, the man who said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." But what if that isn't Heraclitus at all? What if Raphael was hiding someone else beneath that brooding gaze, someone whose very existence threatened both faith and philosophy? To understand that possibility, we have to look at a strange historical coincidence. When Raphael was painting the School of Athens, his rival, Michelangelo, was working just one floor above him, locked inside the Sistine Chapel, painting the ceiling that would redefine Western art. The two men were bitterly competitive. Raphael admired Michelangelo's genius, but despised his secrecy and his temper. And yet, something happened during those months that changed Raphael's art forever. According to accounts from the papal court, Raphael bribed a guard to let him secretly enter the Sistine Chapel one night to see Michelangelo's unfinished ceiling. What he saw stunned him. The muscular, godlike forms of prophets and sibyls, carved in color and shadow, painted not as saints, but as divine rebels. He returned to his studio shaken, and the next day, he altered the design of the School of Athens. He added one new figure, the man who looks back. That man's pose, expression, even his rugged face are unmistakably modeled on Michelangelo himself. Raphael had painted his rival into the fresco, a hidden tribute to the man whose art had transformed him. Or so the story goes. But others believe there is more to it than rivalry or admiration. Michelangelo, though devout, was obsessed with forbidden knowledge, with anatomy, with the hidden geometry of creation, with the tension between body and soul. He read the banned works of Hermes Trismegistus, the same text that whispered of a divine science hidden from mankind. He believed that truth lay not in scripture alone, but in the human form, the body as a map of the cosmos. And Raphael, having seen that vision with his own eyes, may have decided to record it where no one would think to look, within a fresco dedicated to reason. By painting Michelangelo as Heraclitus, Raphael did something daring. He fused the past with the present, pagan with Christian, reason with revelation. But that fusion came with a price. For centuries, theologians and philosophers would study the School of Athens as a harmony of intellect, a gathering of minds under divine order. Yet if Michelangelo's face gazes out as Heraclitus, then the fresco is no longer harmony at all. It is a fracture, a moment where human genius turns inward and asks, what if man, not God, is the architect of knowledge? And that question, whispered in oil and plaster, was heresy. It's no coincidence that Raphael painted this fresco in the papal apartments themselves, the symbolic heart of Christendom. The Pope's private chambers were filled with images of divine authority, prophets, saints, and angels. But here, in the middle of that sanctified palace, stood a vision of philosophers, pagans, and seekers, the children of reason, not revelation. It was a temple to human thought inside the very seat of divine power. And at its heart sat Michelangelo's face, staring back at anyone who dared to look. But if Heraclitus was Michelangelo, who, then, was missing? Because even with Michelangelo added, the fresco's balance feels incomplete. A gap remains, a subtle absence between Plato and Aristotle, where the mathematical and the metaphysical meet. Raphael's early sketches show a faint outline there, a figure holding a scroll, eyes uplifted as if seeing something the others could not. The figure was erased, covered over before the final layers of pigment dried. What was he holding? What did the scroll say? No document survives, but in 18th century archives, an Italian scholar named Giovanni Pietro Bellori described having seen one of Raphael's preliminary drawings, now lost, in which a man in that position held a parchment marked with the Greek letters, Theta Epsilon Omicron Sigma Epsilon Nu Alpha Nu Theta Omega Pi Omega Iota, God and man. The phrase comes from the Corpus Hermeticum, a forbidden text that claimed divinity dwelled not in heaven, but within the human mind. It was the core of Hermetic philosophy, the belief that man could become godlike through knowledge. If true, then Raphael had dared to place the most heretical truth of his age, the union of divine and human, at the very center of his masterpiece. And someone made him erase it. But Raphael was no fool. Like all masters of hidden symbolism, he understood that to truly conceal something, you must not remove it, you must disguise it. So he did what every genius does when forced to hide truth from power. He buried it in plain sight. Look again at the arches above Plato and Aristotle. Their curves form a perfect vesica piscis, the ancient symbol of creation, two intersecting circles forming the womb of geometry. That shape, used by mystics since Pythagoras, represented the union of heaven and earth, and, in secret tradition, the divine within man. It was Raphael's silent rebellion. The message the church erased from his scroll, he carved into the very structure of the fresco itself. And yet, one mystery still lingers. Because beneath that perfect geometry, under the feet of Plato and Aristotle, lies a single cracked stone, barely visible, deliberately imperfect. Some say Raphael placed it there as a signature. Others say it marks the spot where the missing figure once stood. But a few whisper something even stranger, that beneath that stone, painted into the underlayers of the fresco, lies a face that no one was meant to see. A face Raphael covered, but never erased. It was 1874 when a young art restorer named Luigi Lanzi began cleaning the school of Athens for the first time in centuries. The fresco's colors had darkened under candle soot, its surface cracked and dulled. Lanzi worked slowly, carefully removing the centuries of grime with nothing but alcohol and cotton. But when he reached the area beneath Plato and Aristotle, he noticed something strange, a shadow of pigment beneath the surface, where no figure was supposed to exist. He stopped, looked closer. There, faint but unmistakable, was an outline of a face. A man, bearded, youthful, serene, looking upward toward the arches above him. It wasn't part of the visible composition. It was underneath it. When Lanzi reported his discovery to the Vatican conservators, they dismissed it as a pentimento, a common occurrence when artists change their minds mid-work. But Lanzi was not convinced. The face didn't look accidental. It looked intentional. He made a pencil sketch of what he saw before he was ordered to stop. That sketch, now preserved in the Archivio Segreto Vaticano, bears a haunting resemblance to another known portrait, Hypatia of Alexandria, the pagan philosopher murdered by Christian zealots in 415 AD. If Lanzi's drawing was accurate, then Raphael had done the unthinkable. He had painted a pagan woman into the sacred halls of the Pope. And not just any woman. Hypatia was the embodiment of forbidden knowledge. She was a mathematician, astronomer, and teacher of the Neoplatonists, those who believed in a hidden order behind all reality. To the church, she was a symbol of dangerous intellect, a woman who refused to submit to faith, whose death marked the dawn of the Dark Ages. So what was her face doing beneath the feet of Plato and Aristotle? Some believe Raphael had intended to include her openly, as the union of science and philosophy, the feminine aspect of wisdom. In his early sketches, we find faint notes like Philosopha mulier subsol, a woman philosopher beneath the sun. But when the church officials overseeing the commission reviewed his design, they forbade her inclusion. Women, they said, had no place among the sages. Raphael obeyed, at least outwardly. He removed her from the final composition. Yet rather than scraping her image away, he painted over it. A silent act of defiance, sealing her likeness within the layers of color, as if preserving her soul in stone. Art historians would debate for centuries whether Lanzi's discovery was real or legend. No infrared scan has ever officially confirmed it. But those who have seen the Vatican archives describe a faded inscription beside Lanzi's sketch, Sapientia Occulta, Hidden Wisdom. And this brings us to the heart of the mystery, because Raphael was no ordinary painter. He was deeply immersed in the intellectual circles of Rome's humanists, a group obsessed with resurrecting the lost wisdom of Greece and Egypt. They gathered in secret at the villa of Agostino Chigi, Raphael's patron and one of the most powerful bankers in Europe. Chigi's parties were infamous, lavish affairs where scholars, poets, and philosophers discussed not theology, but Hermetic philosophy, alchemy, and astrology. There, Raphael met Johannes Reuchlin, a scholar who possessed a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum, the same forbidden text said to hold the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. From those writings came the idea that the universe was bound by mathematical harmony, and that through geometry and proportion, one could glimpse the divine mind itself. It is said that Raphael was fascinated, particularly with one concept, that the feminine principle, often suppressed by the church, represented the missing half of divine wisdom. In Hermetic thought, this principle was embodied by Sophia, the goddess of wisdom, the hidden counterpart of God. In Greek, Sophia simply means wisdom, and in Latin, sapientia. Now recall the word beside Lanzi's sketch, sapientia occulta, hidden wisdom. Raphael, it seems, had given that secret a face. If the erased figure beneath the school of Athens truly was Hypatia, then Raphael's fresco was far more than an homage to philosophers. It was a revolution in disguise. A declaration that truth was not the property of men or of priests, but a living essence, hidden in art, in nature, and within the human soul itself. But Raphael knew what would happen if the Vatican discovered such a heresy. So he buried it under paint, geometry, and myth. And yet, it seems someone else knew his secret. Years later, a cryptic note surfaced in the papers of Pope Leo X, Raphael's own patron. It reads, "The painter hides within his harmony a forbidden muse. She is wise, yet silent, for silence is her salvation." It is signed only with the initials AC, Agostino Chigi. The banker had known, perhaps even helped him hide her. What's more, Raphael's final self-portrait, painted months before his death, includes a strange pendant hanging from his neck, a small medallion engraved with the image of a woman's profile, eyes raised to the sky. It is the same face Lanzi claimed to have seen beneath the fresco. Was Raphael still haunted by what he had concealed? Or was he protecting something greater, a truth too dangerous for his age? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. The School of Athens is not merely a depiction of philosophers. It is a map leading to something Raphael wanted the world to remember, but not to find too easily. And what that something is, lies not in the figures, but in the numbers hidden between them. Because Raphael's fresco, it turns out, is also a mathematical cipher. When art historians first began analyzing the School of Athens through mathematical ratios, They expected to find symmetry, the sort of aesthetic perfection typical of high Renaissance art. What they didn't expect was a code. In 1949, an Italian mathematician named Giacomo Rinaldi overlaid the fresco with a grid based on the golden ratio, phi, that mysterious proportion found in seashells, galaxies, and the Parthenon itself. At first, his aim was purely academic. But what he found would challenge everything we thought we knew about Raphael's masterpiece. The fresco aligned perfectly, not by accident, but with deliberate precision. Every column, step, and arch follows a hidden geometry, woven together like a web of divine symmetry. Yet at the heart of that geometry, something strange emerged, a crosspoint, lying exactly between Plato's hand and Aristotle's book. That intersection, Rinaldi discovered, marks the true center of the painting, not the visual midpoint, but the mathematical one. And directly beneath that invisible center lies the spot where the erased figure once stood. This could not be coincidence. Rinaldi began measuring the angles and distances, tracing the way the floor tiles converged toward the central vanishing point. To his astonishment, they formed a pattern identical to the tetractys, the sacred triangle of Pythagoras, symbolizing the harmony of the cosmos. For levels, 10 points. The unity of heaven and earth. The very diagram said to encode the music of the spheres, the mathematical resonance of creation itself. Raphael, it seemed, had built his fresco like a temple of geometry, every line, curve, and shadow singing a silent hymn to number. But what was the purpose of such hidden perfection? Rinaldi turned to Raphael's notebooks, preserved in the Uffizi archives. There, scribbled among sketches of arches and faces, was a cryptic phrase written in Latin. In numeris veritas latet. In numbers, truth hides. To Raphael, truth was not something one could merely paint. It was something one could encode. And what he encoded in the school of Athens was nothing less than a blueprint of the ancient Hermetic ideal, that God and geometry were one and the same. According to Hermetic philosophy, creation was not a miracle but a mathematical act, the divine mind expressing itself through proportion, harmony, and light. In other words, to understand geometry was to understand God himself. That belief was banned as heretical, yet it circulated among secret societies and scholars from Marsilio Ficino to Leonardo da Vinci. Raphael had been listening. He had transformed that secret wisdom into a visual symphony, and in doing so, he had turned a papal commission into a forbidden gospel of reason. Look closely, and you'll see how he hit it. The light streaming from the windows behind Plato and Aristotle isn't random. It falls exactly along the phi grid lines, illuminating the central vault in golden proportion. Each philosopher stands at the intersection of key geometric nodes, their gestures tracing invisible vectors that echo cosmic ratios. Even the stairs beneath them correspond to the Fibonacci sequence: 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, the pattern of life's unfolding growth. Rinaldi's analysis showed that every visible step in the fresco fits that progression. And when the entire structure is mapped onto a spiral, the golden spiral, the curve passes through only 3 figures: Pythagoras, Plato, and the shadowed area where Hypatia once stood. The spiral ends precisely there. If Raphael intended this, it means something profound. The ultimate point of creation, the divine ratio, culminates not in God, nor man, nor knowledge, but in wisdom herself, Sophia, the hidden feminine principle, the one erased by the Church. Rinaldi published his findings in a small journal that same year. Within weeks, the Vatican ordered it withdrawn from circulation. Only a few copies remain, buried in academic collections. The official explanation? Mathematical overinterpretation. But Rinaldi's notes tell another story. In his private diary, he wrote, "I have seen the signature of an intelligence greater than any pope's understanding. The painting is alive, a cathedral of thought disguised as art." Yet Raphael's brilliance went even further. He didn't just hide the geometry. He hid a message, written not in words, but in proportion. When the angular ratios of the main arches are converted into numbers, they form a sequence: 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 9. To any mathematician, those digits are instantly recognizable. It is the beginning of pi, the eternal number representing the circle, the symbol of infinity. Pi, the language of creation. A code Raphael could have only known if he had access to ancient Greek sources long thought lost. Where did he find them? Some scholars point to the Vatican Library, which, during Raphael's time, held texts rescued from Byzantium, including Hermetic and Pythagorean manuscripts smuggled into Rome by scholars fleeing the Turks. It said Raphael befriended one such scholar, George of Trebizond, a translator of Plato and a rumored initiate of the Hermetic Order of the Seven Rays. George vanished shortly after Raphael began work on the School of Athens. His disappearance remains unsolved. Coincidence? Perhaps. But to some, it suggests that Raphael's masterpiece was not merely art, it was an act of preservation. A way to immortalize truths too dangerous to keep in writing. And if that's true, then the School of Athens may still contain a final cipher. One last message Raphael left before his death. Because just weeks before he died, the painter wrote a single line to his friend Baldassare Castiglione, the diplomat and poet. When they ask where wisdom sleeps, tell them, beneath the arches where God and man meet. That line has haunted historians for centuries. For if wisdom refers to Hypatia, the erased figure, then Raphael may have been telling us exactly where to look. The arches above Plato and Aristotle form not just a vault, but a keyhole when viewed from below. A perfect ellipse, the shape of an eye. And in that eye, the meeting of divine light and human shadow. Was this what Raphael meant? Did he hide wisdom, Sophia, within the very architecture of God's temple, right under the Pope's nose? Or was it something more, a revelation not yet discovered, waiting for the right observer to see what everyone else has missed? Because in 2023, a digital scan of the School of Athens revealed something shocking, a pattern of invisible symbols etched into the plaster itself, invisible to the naked eye. No one yet knows what they mean. But one of them, faint and incomplete, appears directly beneath Plato's hand, a circle with a dot at its center. In ancient symbology, that is the sign of the sun, and, in Hermeticism, the symbol of the One, the Source. It seems Raphael's code is not yet finished being read. It was April 6, 1520, the day of his 37th birthday, when Raphael Sanzio died. The man who had painted harmony itself was suddenly gone. His death so sudden, so perfectly timed, that even his friends whispered it could not be natural. The church declared it a divine calling. His pupils called it a tragedy. But those who knew the whispers behind the fresco called it silencing. Because in the months before his death, Raphael had been working on something new, a final composition that, according to his assistant Giulio Romano, was meant to reveal what the School of Athens began. It was never completed. The sketches vanished. The only clue to what he was planning lies in a letter, one the Vatican tried to bury. It was found centuries later in the Codex Chigi, sealed in wax and addressed to Agostino Chigi, his patron and confidant. The letter reads, "I have seen in number and form the image of the divine. Geometry is the language of creation, and within its circle lies the soul of man. Should I not return to finish my work, destroy the sketches? For if they learn what we have found, all harmony will fall." That single paragraph ignited one of the greatest art mysteries in history. What had Raphael found? And why would its revelation destroy harmony? Historians have long debated whether Raphael's death, officially attributed to fever, was natural. But the records tell another story. Just days before he fell ill, Raphael had been summoned to the Vatican Library, where he was overseeing the restoration of ancient texts for Pope Leo X. Among them were fragments of a lost Pythagorean scroll, rumored to contain the mathematical key to creation, a secret geometry linking the human soul to the cosmos. That same week, Raphael's friends reported him troubled and feverish, speaking of visions of the circle and the word. He confided to one of them, the poet Pietro Bembo, that he had finally understood the cipher that bound God to man. Then, days later, he was dead. Some said it was plague, others exhaustion. But Bembo wrote in his diary. The painter's lips spoke of forbidden proportions. The next day, he was silent forever. What were these forbidden proportions? After his death, Raphael's workshop was sealed by papal decree. His assistants were forbidden to touch the unfinished drawings. When the room was reopened months later, the sketches were gone, and among the missing documents was a folio titled Ratio Divina. Translated, the Divine Ratio. If that text ever existed, it would have been a continuation of the geometry hidden within the school of Athens, the ultimate key to Raphael's Hermetic vision. Some believe it described a structure connecting the fresco's figures to the orbital paths of the planets, matching the layout of ancient astrological temples. Others think Raphael had discovered the same geometric constant that Leonardo da Vinci had hinted at in his Vitruvian Man, the unifying ratio between man and universe. But there's one final piece of evidence that suggests Raphael's secret lives on, hidden not in a painting, but in a tomb. When Raphael was buried in the Pantheon, his coffin was placed directly beneath the dome's central oculus, the opening that lets the sunlight fall perfectly across the marble floor. Every year, on his birthday, that beam of light strikes his grave exactly at noon. Architects have measured the angle of the beam. It aligns not with the Earth's axis, but with the same golden ratio embedded in the school of Athens. It's as if Raphael orchestrated his death and burial as the final act of his cosmic design, his body completing the geometry he painted in life. And what about the missing figure, the wisdom erased from his fresco? Look closely at Raphael's tomb. The Latin inscription above it reads, Al hic est Raphael, timuit quos sospite Vinci rerum magna parens et morieni mori, which means, here lies Raphael, by whom nature herself feared to be conquered, and, when he died, feared to die. But beneath that, carved faintly into the base, invisible to tourists, are two small Greek letters, sigma omicron. They stand for Sophia, wisdom. It seems Raphael had the last word after all. He could not paint her openly in the Pope's chamber, but he gave her eternity in stone. The hidden muse beneath the school of Athens, buried beneath centuries of pigment, was the same spirit buried beside him, wisdom herself, immortal, watching from beneath the geometry of heaven. So what, then, is the school of Athens? A fresco? A masterpiece? Or something far deeper, a map of divine proportion, a code of creation written in line, light, and shadow? Perhaps Raphael's message was never meant for the popes or princes of his age. Perhaps it was meant for those who came later, for those who would look closer, question more, and dare to believe that truth could be hidden in art. Because maybe, just maybe, the real school of Athens was never a room of philosophers at all. It was, and still is, the human mind itself. References for description and accuracy. Giorgio Vasari, Lives of the Artists, 1550. Marsilio Ficino, Theologia Platonica Corpus Hermeticum, tr. Brian P. Copenhaver, Cambridge University Press. Francis A. Yates, Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition. Ingrid D. Rowland, Raphael, painter in Rome. Joseph Campbell, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Contextual Symbolism. Vatican Archives reports on the restoration of the School of Athens, 1874, Giacomo Rinaldi. Lu Proporzioni Divine nel Raffaello, Rivista di Storia dell'Arte. 1949, Pope Leo X Letters, Codex Chigi, Vatican Library. Richard Stemp, The Secret Language of the Renaissance.